Rotavirus corona, as we know, has always been one shot, a single shot vaccine in the 12 to 3 week window prior to calving. Cryptium is different. We do need to give a primary course. Hopefully the most useful or practical terms for the seasonal calving system. They'll do their Rotavirus typically kind of Christmas week, first week of January, usually in around then is the typical time. You can give the Cryptium at the same time. There's absolutely no issue with that. Don't mix them, just give them at different vaccination sites. But you will have needed a first shot of the Cryptium 4 to 5 weeks prior to that.
Hello, I'm Stuart Childs and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. It's mid-October and we're going to talk about scour. Unless you have autumn calving cows, calf scour may be a distant memory of spring 24 and is unlikely to be on the radar for 2025 as yet. However, a vaccine against Cryptosporidium is available for the first time ever for calving 2025, and we felt it was important to discuss it now to give people the chance to think about it, source it and administer it if they decide to do so in advance of calving. To discuss it, I'm joined by Helena Madden, Ruminant Veterinary Manager at MSD Animal Health, and I started by asking Helena to tell us about Cryptosporidium and how much of an issue it is.
So I suppose just first of all, in general, maybe to talk about calf scour, or what we might call neonatal calf diarrhea. Every year, without fail, we know when we get our reports back from the regional vet labs that the thing that's most likely to kill calves up to a month of age is going to be calf scour, and that's something not too surprising, I think, to any farmers or vets indeed. And then I suppose where crypto comes into play is it really is one of the leading causes of calf scour. So there are several different things that can cause calf scour, but typically we know from the results we get back from the labs and also from the pen site tests that the vets and farmers will be using that rotavirus and crypto, they are going to account for the absolute majority of cases of calf scour that you're going to see. And quite often you can have a mixed infection of the two of them. So crypto particularly really likes rotavirus. They work well together, and they also tend to mean that the scour is going to be more severe. Crypto itself, then, anyone who's ever dealt with a crypto outbreak, they'll be able to tell you how difficult it is, and it really is one of the trickier agents that causes calf scour. And to be honest, I suppose what's behind that is what crypto is itself. So crypto is actually a parasite. So it's a type of parasite called a protozoa. So it would be kind of a relation to coccidiosis as well, but it does work in a slightly different way. So because crypto is a parasite, what that means is the stage of it that actually infects the calf and causes the calf to get scour is a little egg, what we call the oocyst. So they're these little tiny microscopic eggs that infect the calf, and these little eggs build up massively in the environment, but they're also very resistant, so it's quite hard to get rid of them. So what you would have in a situation, just to kind of put it into context of how severe it is, we know that as few as 17 of these little eggs are enough to give the calf scour. But if you have a calf that has crypto, they'll be shedding billions of them every day, and they'll shed for up to 2 weeks. So if you have several calves in a shed infected with crypto and they're shedding billions of these eggs for up to 2 weeks, you very quickly end up with a huge amount of crypto in the environment. And then what we call the infectious dose on the other side can be quite low. So that's kind of, I suppose, one of the reasons why it's so good at causing disease and why it can be really, really hard to manage it and get rid of it. What it does then after that, so it typically acts like any of the agents that cause calf scour. It'll get into the cells of the intestine, it'll damage them, and that then means that the calf can't absorb nutrients, etc. They end up with an outbreak of scour. Also, because it's a parasite, it's actually quite clever. It's able to kind of continue on its cycle within the animal for quite a long time. So even if a calf gets crypto, that initial crypto infection can stay going on for quite a while. It auto-infects is what we call it. So that initial problem can stay going on. So very hard to, I suppose, eliminate. going to end up at a very high infectious pressure in the environment. And then when it actually gets into the calf, it really does have quite a severe effect on them. And anyone who's ever dealt, as I said, with it will have noticed that.
So effectively, are you saying that calves can get crypto scour, you can treat them, they can cure as such, but then they could get sick again with it because of the fact that it's auto-infecting, as you said, in the system.
Exactly, yeah. So they could start to improve potentially, but then the infection could be prolonged. So what we're doing, or what we're hoping, is that ultimately over time, I suppose with any of these bugs, is that the calf builds up their own natural immunity to them, and then that older animals will get crypto as well, but they're hopefully, unless there was something severely wrong, not going to get sick with it. Whereas the baby calf doesn't have protection. And that's then where your vaccine comes in to protect those baby calves.
Okay, so the other question, I suppose, like you can comment on the rota as well now, but effectively, if you find crypto in, we'll say, the middle of February or the third week of February, are you doomed to failure, basically, for the rest of the calving season, that you're going to be electrolyting a lot of stock to try to keep them right, or that there's huge preventative work going to be needed to try to alleviate trouble?
It will be tricky. There's no point lying about it, especially in our seasonal system where, mid-February, you might have quite a few calved, but you probably have a lot more to calve, and I suppose in Ireland, what happens is with the seasonal calving, and we need to do it, and I know that we just end up with a lot of vulnerable calves at the same time, so you have a lot of calves that can get sick with it. And yeah, absolutely. Once it's in the environment, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get rid of that in that calving season. To be honest with you. Now, of course, there are lots of things you can do to try and minimize the risk. So hygiene is going to be massive. It'll be spread in the feces. So anywhere there's calf feces, that's where they're going to get infected. But yeah, like, you are at that stage going to have to consider, it's here. How do I try and lower down the amount of it that the calves will be exposed to? How can I give the calves the best chance of surviving it if they do get it, through all my other management, my colostrum, my feeding, my bedding, all of that my calves aren't under pressure. And then I suppose the big thing is, with any scour, it's the baby calves, because they're the ones that, if they get it, they're just not going to cope very well with it. So if you end up in an outbreak situation, which does happen, unfortunately, you really have to think about protecting them as much as possible. So even simple things like feeding those calves first, then moving on to your older calves, then moving on to your sick calves. You're just all the time thinking, because you yourself will move it very easily, will move any of the scour pathogens, and you can disinfection, you can change things, but in reality, you're going to get it on you. So anything you can do to kind of just in your head think, how can I lower down the amount of crypto that this baby calf is going to be exposed to? And then on the other side, you're thinking, what can I do to boost up this calf's protection so they have the best chance of dealing with it? But it's not simple, unfortunately, to deal with it. No, not at all.
And just on the rota, then, is the rota similar? Is it, or is it easier to get on top of?
The rota it's similar, to be honest. Like, I suppose it might be a little bit easier to eliminate rota in some ways, but to be honest, again, when you're stuck in the middle of calving season, it's very, very hard to get rid of any of these things. Rota, maybe sometimes you might not see a severe scour, but to be honest with you, rota can cause very severe scours as well in baby calves. So rota or crypto, you're following the same principles with it. It's just that, unfortunately, crypto is so capable of really, really building up, but the rota will build up as well, so it's the same principle.
So I suppose, obviously we're on to talk about the vaccine in particular, but is it effectively, like you said about how resilient crypto is, and we've often spoken about, we'll say, washing sheds and steam washing sheds and disinfecting sheds, and farmers go to those extreme lengths, I suppose, in terms of really trying to get rid of it out of the sheds, and they still get it the following year. It's that tactical a parasite, basically, that it's able to survive a number of different angles
Yeah,
of disinfection, like.
Oh, it does. Like, and look at you still should focus on your
Yeah.
cleaning and disinfection big time and, make sure the shed is fully clean and all that, because we know our disinfectants won't work if there's any organic material and not all disinfectants work. So just make sure you have one that's active. But yeah, look, I suppose the reality is if there's a little bit of it lingering about, and the first few calves get it, they probably don't get a massive amount of it, but they will start multiplying it, and then that's what happens. That's where you get your build up. But I suppose all the time you're still having to think, if I can, reduce this as much as I possibly can, that gives the calf the better chance then of surviving it or getting over it, because ultimately that's what we want them to do. We want them to get immune themselves. And the better the start you have, you'll push it out then. Your earlier calves will get through it. Yes, they will multiply it. In some ways it's unavoidable if they get a bit of it. But you're still kind of trying to minimize the effect, as opposed to going into a heavily contaminated environment early on. Your first calves are up against it, so it all feeds in. But yeah, ultimately the later calves, everyone knows that it's hard, and if you get a long hard spring and you can't get the calves out, that makes it tricky as well.
Okay. So just on the vaccine itself, obviously, I suppose prevention is better than cure, and like we'd be recommending the people would be looking at vaccination. Now, there's often people say, oh, they don't have any trouble with X or Y and they don't need to vaccinate, and look, that's their own decision, but ultimately this is an investment in kind of protecting herd health. So like you've invested in a serious amount of time and effort in MSD into this crypto vaccine. Is it something like 20 years of
23,
research gone
yeah.
into it?
Yeah, 23 years, yeah.
So like there's vets have half their careers gone basically in places with no ammunition effectively to deal with this, only the treatment. So this is obviously a huge step forward for vets to be able to recommend this to their clients. How is it actually working, Helena, in terms of how does it function? What's it doing? And I suppose, is it a vaccine that's being given to a calf, or is it similar to other vaccines that are being given to the
Yeah,
cow?
exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. And that's what it's all about. So, yeah, no, you're right. The research it would blow your mind actually when you start looking into the amount of work. And we had human health colleagues involved as well, which is kind of a different aspect we should mention really about it being in humans as well. But yeah, huge, mind blowing research got into developing this vaccine. If you're into vaccines, you'd love it. But basically, you're right. It's a great question. Are we vaccinating the calves or are we vaccinating the cows? Is determines a lot of it. So what we're doing is essentially we're following the same principles as Rotavirus Corona, which has been around for as long as we've been trying to make crypto, actually, probably. So yeah, we're vaccinating the cow in the period close to calving, so in that 12 to 3 week window prior to calving, which is something we're very familiar with Rotavirus Corona. And the reason that we do that and the reason that it works is we know the amount of protection that the calf gets through colostrum and then through transition milk as well from the mother. So we boost up the amount of antibodies or the proteins that the mother has to protect against these diseases, and then this then gets passed on to the baby calf. So what it means is, as soon as that calf gets colostrum, gets that milk into them, they then have protection against the disease. Because at that stage, they have no protection of their own, because as we know, they're born with no immunity to these bugs. And we're getting in protection really, really quickly by using the colostrum. So we're kind of capitalizing on the wonderful system that is colostrum by vaccinating the cows. So that's the basic principle, is the same as what we do with Rotavirus and have been doing for quite a while.
Okay, and I suppose just to focus on the colostrum piece there for a minute, like you can vaccinate cows in, I suppose we'll talk about the time frame of the vaccination in a minute now, but we'll say you give your shot there in December, just 3 weeks prior to calving for rota. The quality of the colostrum is still going to be driven by the nutrition of the cow. So just vaccinating alone, like isn't going to solve all the problems. So you could have your cows vaccinated, but if you have poor quality colostrum because of poor nutrition in the run into calving, there is quite a high risk that you still get all the problems.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
No, absolutely. And it's such an important point to make, because we're relying on that. You know, we're not vaccinating the cow to protect the cow, we're vaccinating the cow to protect the calf. And absolutely, if the colostrum quality is not there, colostrum quality is those antibodies which are they need for all the other things, but if the colostrum isn't able to boost them up, it's not going to benefit from the vaccine ones either. So absolutely, if you do run into problems with colostrum quality, you're going to have issues anyways. But yes, your vaccine is just can't. It needs the colostrum to do what the colostrum is meant to do in order for it to work. So it can be an issue. But yeah, you're right. It means you have to be thinking about, you know, I'm using this vaccine, I'm spending the money on this vaccine. I need my colostrum to be right anyways, or my calves will, you know, suffer. But in order to get your return, you have to get your colostrum piece right. And I know that's easy to say that, and there's a lot of factors involved in it. But yeah, it comes back to focusing on all those things in advance. You know, that's going to make a difference then for the calving.
Okay, so I suppose, as I said at the outset there, the reason why are we talking about this in October, I suppose it's a new vaccine. We were talking about this, you and I, this time last year actually, and you were hopeful that we would have it available for the 24 calving season, and it just didn't materialise. So it is going to be readily available across the country for 2025. And as I think it's probably it's a part of the suite of measures that farmers will be using basically to try to combat disease pressure during the springtime. But this is slightly different, like as you mentioned, the Rotavirus Corona there, and people will be familiar with how that's used. But there's a slight twist in how Bovilis Cryptium is going to be used. So I suppose you better explain that to people, just to explain why we are talking about it in October.
We're saying this now, as you say, in October, because people are probably just starting to think about drying off, never mind their scour vaccines. So yeah, exactly. Rotavirus Corona, as we know, has always been one shot, a single shot vaccine in the 12 to 3 week window prior to calving. Cryptium is different. We do need to give a primary course for the first year. So in a way, it's very similar to a lot of your other vaccines, your Bovipast and your Bovivac, etc. We'll give 2 shots the first year. So it is only for your first year of using it. So this year, for example, now it will be, I suppose, the most amount of work for herd, because you'll be doing cows and replacement heifers. But yeah, exactly. It's the primary course. It's 2 shots, 4 to 5 weeks apart. And that still happens in the 12 to 3 week window before they calve. So I suppose to put it into hopefully the most useful or practical terms for the seasonal calving system, they'll do their Rotavirus typically kind of Christmas week, first week of January, usually in around then is the typical time. That's fine. You can give the Cryptium at the same time. There's absolutely no issue with that. Don't mix them. Just give them at different vaccination sites. But you will have needed a first shot of the Cryptium 4 to 5 weeks prior to that. So you do have flexibility in how you do it, provided the 2 shots are given, like as in the second shot is no later than the 3 weeks before calving. But I suppose just to kind of keep it as, you know, maybe practical for the typical seasonal calving system, what it means is they'll need to think about scour vaccination about a month before they'd normally put in their Rotavirus. So that will be actually in the next few weeks, to be honest, that will become relevant. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that's just an important point for people to be aware of, that effectively we'll take a chance on it. You're talking about having to vaccinate the last week of November for this for the first time. And I suppose just to follow through on that then, Helena, like you said about the Bovivac, we'll say that won't need to be done twice next year for the cow herd, but it will need to be done twice. Again, people will have to be aware that that last week of November now there's going to be a vaccine required for the in-calf heifers again.
Yes, exactly. That's it. So it is just the same as any other vaccine. It's a primary course the first year, and then it's just one annual booster thereafter for all the years after that, and that then will just fit in with your Rotavirus Corona, so they will go in at the same time. So as I say, your first year is your trickiest because it's a new vaccine and you haven't vaccinated any of the herd before. from next year on, or whenever you take up the vaccine, then it just becomes your replacement heifers. They need a primary course, and then after that they slot in with the main herd, and they get their 2 vaccines in the usual time that you give it.
Okay, so I suppose we've been talking a bit lately in relation to costs and trying to control costs and so forth. So people will be thinking a double course of vaccine now isn't going to be cheap, but I suppose. And I'm not going to ask you to tell me the price, because obviously it goes out and practices will sell it at different prices and so forth. But it isn't going to be cheap anyway. It's going to be probably something around the course of the Rotavic as well. Like why should I do it then? You know, like that might be the way people will be thinking. But how severe is Cryptosporidium in terms of the impact that it has on an animal, and put a value on it for me as such, for the check I never write as such, for the calves that get it, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's the thing that we do, and we do it, where you kind of say, you know, it'll cost you this much, but it'll cost you this much if you don't do it, kind of a thing. And look, I suppose it is one aspect of it, but there's a lot of other things to think about as well in scour outbreaks. But yeah, we do have figures. I suppose, being honest, we have a lot of research on maybe the costs of pneumonia and calves, and particularly the longer term impact. We're learning more about the costs of scour now, and we're actually going to do more work in it. But yeah, a few different pieces of work done to put a few figures on it, I suppose. So an outbreak of scour in a 100 cow dairy herd, kind of taking into account mortality, reduced growth rate, and then the treatment cost. Now the treatment cost in this was €8.71 when we calculated it out, which I think is relatively conservative. So that was working in as roughly a cost then of €67 per calf in that 100 cow dairy herd. Now we do have a little bit more research just come out, a bit of Dutch research looking at dairy heifers in particular. So they noted a cost of between €140 to €190 extra because of the costs involved in getting those heifers right. And then I suppose the other really significant thing, and farmers will know this and vets will know this, if calves get scour, they're a lot more likely to get pneumonia as well, which makes sense because their immune systems are down, etc. They can even be up to 17 times more likely to get pneumonia. So if you have, any calf, but I suppose maybe because we know how much the pneumonia affects the replacement heifers, they get scour, you have the initial cost of that, then they maybe get pneumonia on top of it. They'll probably never fully not feel the effects of that, and maybe potentially never actually fully reach their target. So absolutely, the costs, just put it down as a figure versus the cost of vaccination, which I do appreciate the first year is more expensive. After the first year, it will, even out to anything else that you have been using. But just putting figures on it, there's certainly an imbalance. But I think the other side of it as well, Stuart, being honest with you, is like when it comes to calf scour, it's just the amount of work it puts on farmers when they're already trying to rear calves, and then you're trying to get fluids into calves. So you're maybe feeding them 4 times a day. Then you're trying to stop other calves getting it. You already have X amount of cows calving down in a short space of time. It's huge pressure to put on the system. So certainly the cost argument, we have the information for that, but there's, like any disease, there are other layers to it. But I suppose scour in particular, it just is, it's so difficult for people to deal with on top of everything else,
Yeah, and like even if you just take the figures that you quoted there, like that's coming to some money, like
Exactly.
in terms of, but it's just again, it's coming back to the fact that I'd say it's a saying that's nearly synonymous with me at this stage. You just don't write the check for it, like, and people don't see the actual true cost of it, maybe, like.
Yeah, no, and that's it exactly. Like if you go through a genuine outbreak and you actually sat down, and the amount of times you've gone in, you've gotten electrolytes, if the vet is coming out, as well, which they quite often have to do if things are severe enough, it can be quite scary, to be honest, what you end up with, So, yeah, absolutely. Like those figures are always in some ways hard to quantify, but they are the ones that we have. But it could absolutely end up costing you a lot more than that. And then you have to consider the long-term impact as well. if you have heifers and they just don't, they don't reach
Yeah,
full
if they
term.
don't
It's
make the
costing you
grade,
money
because
for
we had
it.
Hazel Costigan on a couple of weeks ago talking about them, and like very conservatively €1,500 to rear them, like, and if they don't, they're gone, the way costs have gone, they're probably gone out into nearly their third lactation almost before they start to
Yeah,
recoup their costs, like. So I
exactly.
suppose, just, is there any concern in terms of maybe people might say, oh sure, look, I won't bother with the vaccine here now, and I'll treat them if they run into problems. Is there any issue with we'll say, the effectiveness of the treatment? I've heard maybe people finding that it's not been as effective as it was in previous years. So is there kind of a resistance maybe coming in some cases?
Yeah, I couldn't turn around and say that I have, scientific proof of resistance, being 100% honest about it. But you see, if you're going down that route, and look, that may be a decision someone makes, but at the end of the day, like, you're already on the back foot there. You're losing money straight away. Whereas if you can take the preventative approach, yes, that costs money as well, but at least then you're giving yourself the best chance of trying to reduce the risk of it. And look, the vaccine is, as we say, one part of it. You do still have to consider all your other factors that feed into it. But yeah, look at as regards resistance, as I couldn't say for certain, but certainly, maybe the products that are out there, there is an oral antibiotic is one product, and we're well aware of antimicrobial resistance, and orally administered antibiotics, unfortunately, are really the worst offending way to result in resistance. Some of the other products then, yes, in certain situations, it's probably great that we have had them, because we hadn't had them while we were waiting for the vaccine, where would farms be? But they certainly don't come without difficulties as well. If you're using a preventative approach with those, you're talking every day for 7 days. And some of the products can be a little bit hard on calves if they are already scouring. To be honest with you, they're not in many situations suitable, because the calves just aren't able for them if they're already under pressure with scour. So, there are limitations on the treatment options, but again, if you're if you're taking that approach, you're I suppose in some ways kind of saying, I'm happy now to deal with this for the rest of the spring. Whereas if I get in ahead as much as I can, you're lowering down the chances.
Yeah, so I suppose the way I always look at vaccination, Helena, is like it's on your terms. So effectively, the last week in November, we're going to vaccinate everything for this. We're going to do it again the last week of December, maybe, or Christmas week, as you said there. And we'll do our Rotavic maybe as well, assuming that's gone in as well. And we are basically trying to create the scenario where we don't have to deal with all these scours, which have to be dealt with no matter what is happening on that day. And like you said there, the workload associated with treating calves for 7 days, every calf in the place, and our average cow herd being 100 cows and calving 69% in 6 weeks, means that there's a lot of calves to be dosed, and there's a lot of cost associated with that as well. So I think it's a huge credit duty for the persistence, I suppose, to be honest, to stay at it. I know, again, Mary McAvoy was on a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, in relation to grass seed, and it taken 15 years to get a product out. It's huge investment of time and resources into it. So credit to you for working on it and getting something out. I suppose, just to sum it up, I suppose people need to be conscious of the timing of this vaccine. So it needs to be done, as we said there, maybe the end of November, end of December. The colostrum quality is critically important then. And then the final step on that journey then is to actually make sure that quality colostrum gets into the calf, and that they get enough of it for a certain period of time. So what's the recommendation in terms of the amount of colostrum that they need to get for Bovilis Cryptium?
Yeah, so you follow your usual colostrum principles. So whether it's your 1, 2, 3, or your 8.5 to 10% of body weight, whatever you're following, and then after that, the recommendation is that they receive colostrum and or transition milk, whichever way you want to define it. So I suppose after the first milking, that is colostrum. Then from 2 to 6, we call it transition milk. So it's that they receive that milk for at least 5 days. So that's, again, that comes back to the principle of the vaccine. The colostrum piece is hugely important, but that colostrum and that transition milk has all those antibodies and those proteins that protect against disease. So when the calf is taking that in, basically just helps to kind of protect the gut, because that's where the bugs get in, and almost act as a barrier to them getting sick from it. So at least 5 days, but as long as you want to feed that milk to calves, depending on the practicalities on your farm, which you have to be aware of, that milk is fantastic for calves. It's extra boosted up if they've vaccinated, but even without vaccination, that milk is so beneficial. So yeah, that's the recommendation for that one.
Okay, very good. So if people are interested in following through on the vaccination, is it just contact their local vets then?
Yep, yeah. So it's good to go, essentially. So if you want to contact your vet, they'll be able to provide it to you. There's no issue. And we're fully stocked up. So yeah, it's there, it's ready to go. So it's just a case, of contacting your vet and getting in, and they'll arrange it for you. Absolutely no problem.
And while we have you on that, then are you fully stocked up for everything else as well? There's no fear of any deficits of any vaccines this season?
At the moment, we're not. Some of the vaccines, I suppose, we're filling in for when there maybe were supply issues, but there is then a supply of those coming on again. So yeah, no, in general, thankfully at the moment, you maybe have to wait a couple of weeks for some of them, but in general, they're all good, and yeah, significantly improved. Yeah, we did get caught with a few for various reasons, but at the moment, things are solid. But look, it maybe in some ways it's no harm, for supply chains, and we're caught at them as well. So, just for farmers, we hope that we always have everything in stock all the time, and that's our plan. That's what we want. But maybe just to be thinking that little bit ahead, with your vaccines. But yeah, no, at the moment we're okay.
Very good. Super. Thanks for coming on today, Helena, and for giving us that insight into the new vaccine, and the best of luck with it.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Thanks, Mel.
That's all for this week's episode of the Dairy Age podcast, and my thanks to Helena Madden for joining me on this week's show. We now have a dedicated Dairy Age email address if people want to make contact. You can email us at dairyage.podcast@teagasc.ie. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Stuart Childs, and join us next time for your Dairy Age.